Welcome back to the Trip Sitting Podcast. On this episode, we welcome Michaela Carlin, aka the Psychedelic Mom. Now, she is an integration coach. She is a podcast host herself over at the Psychedelic Mom Podcast. And she is also just an amazing individual who I'm super, super happy that I was able to connect with and become friends with now. And we had such a great conversation. I had a really good time just listening back to it. One of the main themes that we talked about was just the idea of awakening and what it actually means to awaken. And during this conversation, we both go pretty deep into our healing journeys, talking about past family systems that we've had to deal with, past patterns that were showing up in our lives before, and how psychedelics has helped both of us recognize those patterns and then make changes so we don't repeat those patterns going forward. And I hope that everybody gets something from this episode and enjoys listening. We had a really great time recording. So Here we go.
Well, psychedelic to me means that which reveals the soul. And certainly earth medicines and psychedelics reveal truth in the soul of who we are and aspects of ourselves that are hidden. But I would say that what I like to do is look at all of life as psychedelic. So in that post that you're referencing, I think, yes, I had a follow-up, like, what is psychedelic? And everything can be, even something like a trigger, when you're triggered, can reveal aspects of yourself that are unhealed, need attention. So I really have this idea that life is psychedelic. I posted something recently that motherhood is one of the most powerful psychedelics on the planet. Mm-hmm. And it really resonated because I think when you take these two aspects of who I am, you know, in some ways I can talk about how I got into this space, but when I think of it, motherhood as psychedelic, that's something that I've really been looking into, like this initiation into motherhood and how motherhood really reveals aspects of ourselves that we didn't even know. And I say it's not a microdose. There's no microdose option to motherhood. It is a full-on heroic dose. And it's not a short journey. It lasts your entire life. And this is kind of how I'm looking at a psychedelic.
I think it's one of those, like, I guess, like a rite of passage. And I think that in community today, or at least in like Western culture, we don't really have a lot of those true rites of passage anymore, and like look at them as a rite of passage and as, you know, a pretty big event. Whereas like when you look at all these ancient cultures and a lot of the ceremonies that they would hold, whether it includes plant medicine or not, it's for, you know, when you turn a certain age, when you become a father, when you become a mother, there are all these specific things that they do through all of these symbols that allow you to get to that next point and like have that sort of hero journey that I think psychedelics also bring. And it's just kind of interesting. It feels like in the West, you're just thrown into it. Like it's just expected.
Definitely. And we don't market in the same way that we used to before. And for a lot of people, in particular in the psychedelic space, traditional religion falls away. Because when you experience a psychedelic, in some ways you're, for some of us, the original container that we came from that held our spiritual ideas and ideologies and traditions don't necessarily fit anymore. And the container of what we experience in psychedelics is much broader. And so in that, sometimes we lose our rituals, our markings of things. And for every culture, ritual and ceremony was so important. And so for the Westerners who are now heading into this space of using earth medicines and psychedelics that have been used for centuries, in some ways it is a way to come back to our own indigenous roots and to honor the indigenous peoples that have kept these medicines alive. I do find that if we are working with psychedelics in an intentional way, we really are stepping back into a way of marking initiations and also looking at other aspects of our life as an initiation, as a psychedelic. Like we could say, how is my career psychedelic? How does it reveal the truth of who I am?
Yeah.
And what I really am trying to do with the Psychedelic Mom podcast is really look at, because this was part of my journey, you take a psychedelic and suddenly it starts to peel back the layers of what's true. And to really move into a more conscious way of being, it's not comfortable. It can actually be incredibly uncomfortable, because what we're doing is we're peeling back everything that we knew, our entire enculturation. Like I like to look at our social, cultural, familial, political, economic systems and say, how is this psychedelic? And how does it reveal the truth of who I am? And this word that I came up with that I've been using is, or how is it psychocryptic? Psychoclyptic, like how does it actually conceal my truth or require me to hide the truth of who I am? Or how do these systems invert the truth? And so if we really look at life as psychedelic, we can start to really look at, where do I feel truth? When am I aligned to my truth? And what systems do I participate in that actually invert my truth or ask me to conceal what my truth is? So that's kind of been somewhat of my own personal journey through this space.
I have so many ways that I can go with this. And okay, I think first I want to go back to the talking about, I guess, religion thing. Did you grow up religious at all, or did you grow up with a religious background?
I did. So I grew up in what I would say like the land of the perfect. Like I really had this idyllic childhood. I came from this quaint little New England town. I grew up in a traditional family, Catholic. I ended up going to a non-denominational Quaker-based school for high school and middle school. And I always like to say now, I didn't realize it really until looking back. We used to do Friday silent meetings for 15 minutes. And when you start something like that as a sixth grader, just sitting in the silence, in my 20s, I realized that really was the foundation for my meditations. And I did go to Boston College, a Catholic university, but it is a Jesuit school. And I think what the Jesuits do well is they ask you to question. So at a young age, in my early 20s, I was really starting to study like Buddhism, Taoism, really diving into meditation at a time where that was kind of strange. It's kind of like, are you converting? And I was like, no, I just really like some of these traditions. And the Catholic religion, at a certain point, I knew wasn't containing everything that I believed. And in some ways was subverting some of my real beliefs, actually. And then also within my family, I have people that are within the LGBT community. And I think that was kind of the final straw for me. You know, I have a gay daughter, and I thought, wow, this isn't a place where that's truly welcomed. And how can I actually support a faith tradition that doesn't truly support the wholeness of my family? And I started to really peel back the layers of what life really is, what true, I would call it the religion of no name really is, and what it means to truly be following a path that is like the golden rules, the perennial rules of life. And so
it's interesting just hearing you kind of talk about that. And since I've started my own journey with plant medicine, I guess going back even further, I'm definitely not somebody who considers myself religious. I grew up Jewish, And I had a bar mitzvah, which is a huge rite of passage for somebody who's Jewish, but it never, to me, felt like that rite of passage of becoming a man, which is what it's for. It felt like I was doing it because I had to do it. Like, it didn't have that significance to me at all. And so I just never fully aligned with Judaism. It seemed like, everybody that was there, they're just there because like we had to be there. Nobody was there really like believing in the things that we're saying. And like, some of our holidays, like I would go to temple for like 6 hours. And like, that's exhausting, just being in a place. And like, you don't really understand as a kid, like you're there to just kind of chill and relax and not supposed to be doing this, but like they almost make it kind of strict. We're like, oh, like you need to know all these prayers. You need to be reading Hebrew. You need to be doing all these things. And so it took away from, I think, what it was meant to do. And since I've now started this psychedelic journey, I've now realized that so many of the practices within these organized monotheistic religions do actually translate a lot into meditation, and they translate a lot into like being grateful and like the gratitude portion, and like it's all the same. It's just the way that a lot of organized religions have done it have really taken a different routes and taken away from those really, really simple practices that psychedelics have now helped me kind of get back into my life. And like now I start meditating more, and every single day I'll write in my journal something I'm grateful for. And really when I look back to my experience being raised Jewish, is like, a lot of the prayers that we say and like a lot of things that we do, it really is just that at the end of the day, like when you really simplify it.
It really is. I mean, I think that traditional faith has so much to offer. Even the idea that we put a prayer into the world, even the idea that you take time to actually give thanks and gratitude for this source of life that we are all part of. I think it is really nice. Like, I'm really grateful. I actually grew up with even the thought that there's something beyond me, and that there is a piece of me to attend to. And there's a soul aspect of me. And I do think that all the, major faith traditions have so much embedded in them that is good. And I think in some ways I look at all of them as having a piece of the truth. And when you really go down to kind of the esoteric pieces of each of these faith traditions, it is really what you see in a psychedelic experience. They're not that different.
Yeah. I'm curious. So when was your first psychedelic experience?
Well, let's see. First, let me back up a little bit and say that I am not your typical psychedelic mom. I didn't, if there is such a thing, I grew up in the era of Just Say No to Drugs, in that midst of that campaign. And I was a rule follower and really saw like the egg frying on hot pavement that was supposed to simulate my brain as like, if my brain was on drugs. Happen. So, yeah. And I had a daughter that was depressed in high school, and I kind of was like, SSRIs, I don't know. I had never experienced depression in my life. I had never supported someone who had experienced depression. So suddenly it felt like the oxygen had left the house, and I was a pretty desperate mama looking down a deep internet rabbit hole at a time when psychedelics weren't being talked about. We weren't in the midst of this psychedelic resurgence. So I was down at the end of the internet, and I finally came across an article that said magic mushrooms as a potential for healing depression. I was like, wait, what? I thought magic mushrooms like destroyed your brain. And at the time, I wasn't ready to use my daughter as a psychedelic experiment. It's like, hey guys, there just wasn't enough data. And so anyway, a couple of years later, she is better, go kind of sort of a traditional route, and support her in the best possible ways that I can. And but something was released in me because I had an insatiable appetite for this topic. From then on, I was searching for what in the world these meant. And I think what really piqued my interest, I was someone who has always been interested in optimization, in biohacking, in this idea of, one of my favorite words is this Greek word, arete, and it comes out of Stoicism and the Greeks, and it means excellence, but we don't have like a full translation for the word. And what it really means for the Greeks, it was their highest ideal was to live with arete. And that word means living at one's highest ideal from moment to moment in service to something else. And similar to that, what Dharma would be. It's like living your life path in service to something else. And so that had always been fascinating to me. So was biohacking and my own well-being, whether it was nutrition and fitness. But spirituality was always kind of one of the top areas of that whole idea of self-evolution and optimization. And so when I started to come across articles that was my greatest teachers of ancient time to modern day had used psychedelics, and this was where they gained their wisdom from, like Socrates and Plato and, all these greats to like modern day, even like Marianna Williamson or Wayne Dyer or Deepak Chopra. I was like, I'm totally duped. Like, why? Why not share that? And so then I started, my question was, because my quest has always been really enlightenment of awakening and being more aware and having more access to that deep soul. And so suddenly I found myself on a plane writing my own intentions to have a psychedelic experience. And that was about 5 years ago.
Okay, got it.
And from that moment forward, really my life just changed. I know we hear that a lot and it's so cliche. It's like, my question going in was, can earth medicines and psychedelics give me more access to parts of myself than my conscious mind can, and my 20 years of meditation can? Yeah. And could they give me clarity? I just wanted some clarity. And the answer was so far beyond what I will be integrating all the journeys that I have had my entire life. Like this idea of, 2 integration calls, your journey, and 1 integration call or 2 integration calls after is such an interesting Western model. I think, as we were talking about before, life itself is a journey, and these psychedelic experiences really open up a new path to a new journey. But I'll be integrating forever.
I think that's so important right there, is like throughout life, whether you're engaging in using plant medicines or not, having mentors and having teachers along the way just to simply have conversations beyond yourself is so critical in order to just have that meaning and like have that purpose in life and just finding your own path, however that is. If you don't have that type of person, and then Western medicine, of course, then likes to be like, okay, we'll do a couple calls and then, then you're good. Then you're on your way.
Exactly.
It's not something that, I guess, traditional Western medicine, in which, hey, here's a pill, just take this once a day, every single day for the rest of your life. And then we don't have to worry about it anymore. This is when you get to the root of being of your spirit, it's not like there's an end to it. It continues to go, and it will continue for your entire life.
Right.
And setting up systems that support that is what we need to strive for. But it's hard in this incredibly Western capitalistic society to set that up for everybody when most people don't have access to this.
Yes. And I think you mentioned pill, and I think, it goes back to I think in some ways, even in the psychedelic community, it's like we're looking for a magic pill to, whether that's heal PTSD, trauma, addiction, or to use it as a transformational awakening. And one of the things that psychedelics have certainly taught me is awakening isn't just one awakening.
Yeah.
That awakening is, and there's a difference between having an awakening experience and living an embodied awakened life. And I think that ultimately what psychedelics have taught me, and again, I have so much more to learn, so I don't know if this is what I would say a year from now, but that awakening is continual. It never ends. There's more to awaken to. There are more layers as a human being to ultimately peel back. I do think that if I had to say, like, in some ways, like, what is awakening? I think it's what we were talking about before. It's what all the faith traditions really at their essence were talking about, that spirit, whatever you call it, the all, the mind, God, is really within us. And returning to that remembering that you and I aren't separate. We are one living, breathing, integrated interbeing. And I think what you were saying is very true. After the experience, it's how do we embody what we learned? How do we actually live what these medicines are so profoundly teaching us?
Yeah. And like the classic archetype of the hero's journey, it's after you have, basically go through the journey and, slay the monster, whatever it is, how do you then come back into society and integrate that into your daily life and tell other people about it and basically help them do the same thing? And that's what every psychedelic experience, and just simply every experience, as you said, like taking back to what is psychedelic, you said something that triggers you, pain,
grief, loss, beauty.
Even like beauty, joy, laughter. These are all psychedelic experiences that we can have and then take back with us and essentially embody these parts back into our normal lives.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, going back to like the religion, is like, if somebody were to ask me today, what do I practice? So like, what do I consider myself? Like, one, I'll always be culturally Jewish just because that's just how our religion works. But as far as like my actual belief system, spiritual, agnostic, but basically like throughout this whole journey, I'd say I've lost religion, but found God.
Yeah.
Like I believe in that higher being. I don't believe I need to pray to him every single day and that he's going to fucking smite me if I don't. But I do believe in like the oneness of the universe and the fact that we're all connected. All of us are God. All of us embody God. And that's one of the main teachings of Jesus Christ, is that we are all God. We are all part of him. And that's also what then got him in trouble. People saying that, hey, wait, you can't say that.
Right.
And it's just, once you start to take things literally, we just get into a lot of trouble.
Definitely.
And then it becomes a lot for power rather than for the greater good.
And I think for a lot of women too, I think another reason where sometimes the traditional faith traditions lack in some way is even the idea of God being a male,
Yeah.
it comes out of our, like, is God masculine or feminine? Is it beyond both? These are the things that I think psychedelic experiences, all those existential questions start to emerge.
Yeah.
And, you were just hinting on the hero's journey. And I think I was recently talking to a friend, and, psychedelic journeys and doing this kind of deep excavation of self is probably the hardest work I've ever done, honestly. And so then when you go on this path and you go through one of the cycles of a hero's journey, there's like this, like when you kind of come to the end of that hard, brutal journey, it's as if I don't know, this like magical thinking of mine would be like, well, this is when all manifestation is just easy, right? Because I went through the hero's journey. So now I can just manifest like that, right? And like everything's just going to magically show up, right? Because I just went through this really hard experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't work like that either. It wasn't like anybody showed up and was like, congratulations. You just went through a really hard hero's journey. It's like, does anybody know what I just went through?
Because that's, you know, I guess with being an integration specialist as one of the things that you do, like, that's why having somebody to talk to afterwards and try to make sense of it to help with that integration process is like also so vital. Whether it's vital. Are specifically, again, doing that with an integration specialist or with just a therapist or with a friend or literally anybody, or even just intentionally making sure that you take the time to do it on your own. Not everybody has access to the same things. Do you think that that can work, or do you think that you need somebody else that is an objective third party?
Community is vital. I think two things. When I started working with psychedelics, there wasn't a community around me. I didn't live around people that would even think that psychedelics were an option, period. And so I kind of came home from my journey and was like, who is there to talk to about this? I did drag a couple friends in. So I got to go through this journey with a couple of friends because I really was like, you really need to do this. They knew they were suffering from some stuff. And again, I didn't go in because I thought I had anything to heal, which is funny now because...
Did you?
Yeah. And now it's like, I didn't have the languaging of like the understanding of trauma. I didn't have the languaging of any of this. So what happened was I did this psychedelic journey, and in that journey, it was like seeing yourself on the other side and being asked to look at yourself from the witness perspective, but also from almost like the sacred. How does the sacred see you? Or how does this love? I really think it's all love, and how does that see you? And it showed me that I had like this lineage of medicine women within me. I didn't understand it at the time at all. It really showed me as someone who was in this space. And I know a lot of people have that experience. But then I realized one of my great grandmothers was one of the first pharmacists in the United States. I think she was the first female pharmacist. And, when you think about even how medicine was done then, it was very different. They were doing the compounds. They were working in that medicine space very differently than our now Western form of, pharma. But that I have this line of women in my lineage that were medicine women. And it did not make sense to me at the time. And yet each journey showed me the same thing. And I remember one particular journey, and I was in an apprentice program for a year long, working with the toad medicine. And I remember dreaming actually the night before my journey about basically going into the feminine wound, the cosmic, also earthly wounds of all women, and then being rebirthed through that. And so I was like, whoa, that's kind of deep. And so the next day, that's actually what I experienced on Toad, was going into kind of the feminine wounds that we carry as women, and men carry wounds too. And that, I came back from that journey, as you often do. Our bodies know even how to heal within a journey. And I came back doing this like pounding on my chest bilaterally. And I found out later that that's actually a very healing bilateral kind of vagus nerve thing. And as I opened my eyes, there was a group around me and a woman with a drum who had started to sing, who was a friend. And as I was coming kind of back from this journey, this deep understanding that every generation has medicine carriers to bring truth and to keep this message alive, that we are who we truly are. There I was kind of opening up my eyes to a group of 12, 15 others who are now carrying the medicine now. And medicine doesn't have to be, as we're talking about, psychedelic. It can be humor, it can be art, it can be anything. It can be motherhood, parenting, it can be podcasting. And I love what you said about holding space, because basically after my first psychedelic experience, I go all in sometimes.
Yeah.
And I just was all in. I started studying with Being True to You to be a psychedelic integration coach. Then I started working with Dr. Dan Engel one-on-one, thinking, well, if I'm going to do this work, I should learn from the best. Maybe I'll have him be kind of my coach for a little bit. And, it was fascinating because every now and then he'd give me a book to read or something, and this would be really helpful with clients. And I'm like, oh, you're so clever. This is really,
I see what you're doing.
Really all about me. And so what happened was I started to go down this path of studying. While I was doing that, I was apprenticing with different medicines. I was apprenticing with different people. And ultimately what happened was medicine showed me I had my own deep healing work to do on so many levels.
We all do.
Yeah, which I was not aware of.
I'm curious, like really quick, just to, I guess, back up. Before your first experience with plant medicine, psychedelic medicine 5 years ago, what were you doing at that point? Were you a full-time mom? Were you also working in, traditional Western corporate America? Like how did you transition?
Yeah, good question. So I am a mother of 4, and I have a big span between my kids. I had my first child at 24 years old. And so definitely being a mother was my primary, I'm going to say love and passion and career, really. But all along, I also had apprenticeships. I had started a little entrepreneurial things. I've always been also an entrepreneur. So at one time I owned a frozen yogurt smoothie shop. I started right out of college. I was in PR, and then I started a home accessories and fashion company, and have been always kind of drawn toward design, and then helped launch a couple businesses. So really kind of different kinds of things, an environmental employment company. So I really had my hands in. I love the idea of creating in general, and even birthing anything. So, so that's what I was doing before my journey. And then everything really changed. Yeah.
Were there some people that were ever, I guess, holding you back, or you kind of had to say goodbye to after you started down this path? Or were you already surrounding yourself naturally with people that supported you wholeheartedly right from the get-go?
No. Yes. Yes, no, yes. So basically, I definitely was not upfront about my psychedelic experience in the beginning. I was studying psychedelics. I was curious. And I was seeing if these could be a good option for my daughter who's on SSRIs and different medicines. So at first I was really kind of very cautious about being open about them, actually for years. And then, I think part of my entire journey was psychedelics, excuse me, which I think is common for all of us in some ways. What they're really doing is they're peeling back your truth, how to stand in it, your sovereignty, your individuation. And so as I went down that path, I realized being married young, having children young, as many ways as I had in my life gone through individuation processes, psychedelics was a crash course in ways in which I had not yet really individuated, ways in which I wasn't sovereign, I wasn't, in some ways, what I really had to learn too is the ways in which I participated in my own self-suppression, because ultimately every dishonesty or smudge of truth is born out of fear, right? So the fear to not be able to say from my truth, these medicines, although you think of them as drugs, and although you have a perception of them, that's not what they are.
Yeah.
And so at some point, once I knew that myself and trusted that in my entire being, there was a particular journey that I've spoken of a little bit with iboga, where I don't know if you've ever experienced iboga, but it is.
I have not.
I will be integrating iboga forever. The most, so if for anybody that doesn't know what iboga is, it's a root from Gabon, Africa. And it is such a powerful medicine. And it is kind of taken care of by the Bwiti. And one of the most important words to the Bwiti is base, base. And I don't know if I say it correctly. I've heard people say basi, basi. But it means truth. And I had this really incredible journey with iboga where it showed me two things. Number one was a truth that I was having a really hard time coming to. It was repressed memories from childhood that had been delivered pretty slowly through psychedelics. And I had a moment with iboga that night where iboga was still in my system. It's 24 hours later.
Yeah, I've heard it lasts a very, very long time.
And I am just like, I need you. I need to be iboga free. And I was told that iboga just needed more time with me. And so in my soul, I had a conversation with iboga, and it was, okay, if what you're showing me is true and it's something that I need to deal with in my life, I will. But I need you out of my body. Yeah. And in that second, every iboga left. And I've never experienced anything quite that profound where a prayer was answered instantaneously. And I could feel it because I had ringing in my ear. I had pain in my leg. I was still kind of hallucinating. And the other thing that iboga so beautifully left me with was that I couldn't be on this path, couldn't really serve medicine. I couldn't really hold space unless I was truly authentic and aligned to my truth. And from that moment on, I was unwilling to not say what was true. And in some ways, that was a process too, because again, I grew up with conditioning and enculturation of what a woman is, and kind of like what we're kind of like the psychedelic mom is a polarity, right? Just that in and of itself, to come from traditional background and then suddenly be like the psychedelic mom. That was a process. That was a process of really deeping into my own discomforts of what it really is like to stand in what's true. And sometimes I heard recently, and I really liked this, the way this was framed, that awakening is really being able to stand in more reality. And so that can be beautiful and it can be incredibly uncomfortable.
Scary.
And so terrifying, annihilating, this phrase of die before you die. I didn't understand that. I didn't understand the parts of myself that had to die away. Yeah. And parts that had really been birthed out of life. And I think we all have that. We come out of fear. Yes, we come into a particular family. We come into a particular race, a particular ethnicity, country, all of it. And that enculturation in some ways is what I think little by little we peel back to see, like, well, who am I? Who do I choose to be? What are my
Yeah.
beliefs? Yeah.
Yeah. It's these conditions and basically the conditioning that we've been taught, programmed, however you want to say it. And it's just little things too. Like you see your parents react a certain way when something happens and you immediately think, oh, this is how I should react. Or, you do something and you get scolded for it. Or on the flip side, you get rewarded for acting a certain way. Well, now you're going to try to do more of that in order to keep getting that reward. And our body naturally wants us to, maximize good, minimize bad. But through this psychedelic journey, I don't believe in the terms good and bad anymore. It's realizing that coming to terms with reality, everything just is. There's no way to control the good and control the bad and try to do things in order to do that. Things are just going to unfold naturally the way that they're supposed to. And our attachment to wanting to feel good all the time and wanting that's what I think ends up creating. I don't think depression is the right word, but can in certain times, just because this is what I've gone through, create that depression because things are not going this way. And therefore I'm sad because I expect it to go this way. And I'm trying to control my life to make it so it's going a certain way. But surrendering to reality and surrendering to just what is terrifying when you've been trying to control for your life basically your entire life.
And what you're hinting on is, and I see this with a lot of clients, I mean, it's biological in some ways. It's like we want to avoid the discomfort and we want to get the serotonin. And you were hinting to, you may learn on a very subtle level from your parents what's acceptable and what isn't. So you may learn that, sharing your authentic emotions, unless they're just happy ones, isn't really invited in this space.
Yep.
So you may learn that that's the way to go about life, is to just, cut off aspects of yourself, exile parts of you. And in particular, women, we don't show much rage or anger. And so you kind of exile the parts of yourself that actually have real reason to be angry. And going back to your other question, did people fall away in my life? I think yes. I think that, yes. I think one of the things I did is I had to then create my own community because it's essential on this path. Having others who walk this path, can speak the language, who can understand you when you are all the languaging, all the process of coming to terms with something, or somatic therapy. It's just all the things that go together, internal family systems, truly understanding that there are parts within you that are there looking for attention. I think community is essential. And I think everything that doesn't serve you starts to fall away, whether that's relationship, lifestyle, everything starts to fall away. And that's challenging, beautiful.
It's challenging. And it's also beautiful. Yeah, I was literally about to say beautiful is I think what it really is at its essence, because as you're learning who you truly are and becoming more authentic in yourself, the things that no longer serve you naturally start to fall away. And the things that do serve you more, you start to attract those things, and they just, they find you in a divine way.
And I think, even taking that to the Psychedelic Mom podcast is definitely not just for moms, because it's really about some of the existential questions about psychedelics, the science, the myth actually out in the psychedelic space too, and the ancient wisdom. But one of the things that I do find interesting is the ways in which, after doing psychedelics, the ways in which I examined these systems and then had to go back and kind of reparent myself, but then also be like, oh, hey kids, that thing that I taught you, you can mix that
so
one.
I was wrong.
Yeah, I was really wrong on that one. And, a lot of people will say that it's kids basically like, oh, my parents aren't really comfortable with me exploring the psychedelics. But in my case, it was the reverse.
Yeah.
It was once I was telling my kids what I was doing, they were like,
so my mom's a hippie
what
now.
Are you doing? Like, honestly. And, to be honest, there was kind of some gaslighting involved there. Like, what are you doing? I'm their mom. Like, what is motherhood? Who is a mother outside of just being a mother? Mm-hmm. And what does it look like when a mother is starting to step into her sovereignty and truth and redefine who she is?
Yeah.
And, it wasn't until even with them, I really had to have a conversation and say, by the way, this hasn't been a joyride. Like, this idea of psychedelics is so glamorized. It's like Town and Country recently had a post on like, why is everybody smoking the toad? I'm like, what? It's like, so once I said, the truth is psychedelics revealed things to me that were probably the hardest things that I've had to deal with in my life. And I wasn't necessarily forthcoming in that. I was just kind of maybe at times too evangelical about psychedelics, because also what you experience on that mystical level is something I want everybody to have.
It's pure peace, joy, bliss, love.
All of it. And so I think once I said, like, I've really been doing deep healing work. That's when I've been off doing this work. It hasn't been like mom at a rave party, dancing. I've really been doing more the intentional work of working with psychedelics to heal aspects of myself, bring back exiled parts. And I've always been so grateful to the medicines that I have worked with, because as dark as they've taken me, they've equally taken me to a state of true ecstasis and beauty. And I have such reverence and gratitude for the fact that these medicines are on the planet, the fact that we now have access to them in ways that we didn't. I'd like to see that be, one of the things that I've really been thinking about recently is just the cost, really, of this path. It's not sustainable for a lot of people. It's doing it the ways that I did it, working with someone one-on-one. It can be an expensive path, and I'd like to see that change. I'd like to see there be more access to these medicines. And also, I always want to remember that I'm white, that I'm privileged, that I'm not in an over-policed neighborhood. I'm not someone who I have the ability to even say, stand in truth and be like, yeah, I've used psychedelics to heal. Some people don't have that privilege either, because the judgments are there, the criticisms are there. And I'm sure, by the way, as a mother who's open about this, I'm sure in my community, I'm sure people maybe say, like, what is she doing? You know, because they don't understand.
There's always going to be judgments when you're doing something that is different, because I think what psychedelics help people realize is that a lot of the societal systems that are in place are not in place to make us better and to really help us. They're in place for control. And so when you realize those things and you're trying to get out of that control system, the people that are still following along, that are still in it, not to their own fault. It's just, again, when you're in it, you can't see outside of it, but there's always going to be that judgment. People don't like it when people do things completely different. And so it's hard, as long as you know you're stepping into yourself. I mean, that's what keeps me going. I'm sure that's probably what keeps you going, is knowing that this is coming from that authentic place and coming from who you really are. But until you really have that confidence, which is not easy to build, you're going to be questioning yourself a lot. And I do,
especially when we were talking about as things start to fall away, that question is, am I on the right path? Like, yeah, how's that been for you?
It's been very, I think just difference. Like it's hard to explain, but like, I think my friends have known for a while that I use psychedelics, but I was never very intentional with it. Like it was always much more recreational. Like we would, take a tab of acid and just like go have fun for a day. And a lot of this was when I was still in college and like just out of college, and I didn't really have much to do. COVID had just started. We were all like, nobody knew what the fuck was going on.
Right.
And I always knew that there was something more to it. I just didn't know what. Like I knew that like I wasn't just doing this like just for recreation and like just to have fun. Like every time that I would go on a trip, I would come back with something that would be more me, something to better myself, something to relinquish some of the anger that I had, something to feel more confident about myself, just feel more grateful and just more gratitude for life in general. And so I knew there was something there. And it wasn't really until my recent journey with ayahuasca that everything just clicked and everything came together. And I truly, truly had to face my shadow and see like the worst parts of myself. And it was, glamorizing that is impossible. Like it wasn't glamorous. Like it wasn't fun at the time, but yet on the flip side, as you said, afterwards, it was like the freest I've ever felt and like the more in tune with myself that I've ever been in my entire life. But going through that journey, it's incredibly, incredibly difficult. And so when you,
that's so beautiful. Ayahuasca is such a beautiful medicine.
Yeah, I've never done iboga, but I've read a lot about it, and a lot of people compare ayahuasca and iboga. Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. But they compare ayahuasca a lot to the feminine, and then iboga is then largely compared to the masculine. And so they are both master plants.
Yes, definitely. Going back to what you just said too, you have this experience with ayahuasca, and it's revealing aspects of yourself that are like the worst aspects of yourself.
Yeah, I just shoved them away and did not want to believe that they existed.
Yeah. I think what's so interesting in my own work and then working with clients, one of, I think, the most profound tools that goes along with psychedelics is like internal family systems, is really those parts that are the worst parts of self that you got to witness, really tracing them back at what age did they begin? What survival mechanism were they for? What beautiful thing were they actually trying to protect you from?
Mm-hmm.
And that, when we start to do that, we start to really have compassion for all parts of ourselves, knowing that they were birthed from something.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty, because once you can bring one of those exiled parts home, or even like you said, first shining a light on, whoa, this way of being is problematic.
This is unsustainable.
Unsustainable. And where did it come from? And what is it serving? And honoring that it had a role at one time.
Yeah. And it is still part of me. Yeah. It served me.
Yeah. I mean, what would you say is one of the hardest things that you had to come to see about yourself?
It was definitely, I mean, it was such an immense amount of like shame and guilt. Mm-hmm. And I think that those two in particular are so common for everybody to just internalize shame and guilt. But it was so much for me. It was like a painful, genuinely painful amount. Like the emotional manifested itself into physical pain for me. while I was on that journey. And it didn't show me exactly where it was coming from. It just basically was shining the light like, hey, this is here.
Yeah.
You've been denying my existence for so long now, but here I am. You need to face me. You need to figure out where this came from. And so after that, that's been the whole integration process, is now doing exactly what you said, figuring out, where did this come from? Why was I doing this in the first place? And again, it all comes back to that place of love, of all I really ever wanted to do was just feel love and be loved and give love out and put that into the world. But then I put up all these blockers and, held in the shame and guilt because I thought that that's what I needed to do in order to feel that love. Mm-hmm. Like that was a defense mechanism.
And shame, you're touching in on it because, look at how most of us live our lives, right? We're running, we're on our phones, we're doing everything to avoid the deeper, uncomfortable aspects of ourselves. Yeah. And I would say like shame is probably the one that feels the most annihilating.
Yeah.
And
did you go through a similar journey?
Yeah, I didn't.
With shame and guilt?
Yeah, and it wasn't something I knew I carried either. So, and I think also one of the things that medicines do that we haven't even touched on really is like just the ancestral carrying of something. So whether it's the ancestral carrying of, I was talking about before, some of what it means to be a woman, or a shame, or ways of being that we carry from like generations in the past. But yes, I would say that one of the things that I had to contact about myself was, I never knew I had shame. I never knew that I had this deep wound that I had to go into and see, what is that from? Why do I carry it? And the only way to do it is actually to feel it, because to get the texture of it and to know it and to feel how awful it is and allow the shame actually to speak to you, to give it a voice. Like, where are you from? What age did you start? What is it that you feel so awful about, And when you allow that shame to speak to you and then to give it love, to be like, you served an incredible purpose. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's beautiful work is what it is. And it is glamorized a lot now. I think that this part of it is not spoken about nearly as much as it should be. Is not like, you just use plant medicine and sit with it. And then you come out 6 hours later and you're like, well, good to go.
Exactly. And then even as a mom, cycle. I have to go. Yeah, and even as a mom, I have to go back and think of the ways in which I reprised my upbringing. Right. People say, "Well, how would you feel about your kids doing psychedelics?" I'm like, "Great, do it young,
please.
Do this work before you have kids. Go explore the deepest essences of yourself,
of you."
Of you, and really individuate, and any ways that I've gotten a second chance to just bow down to my children's individuation, because I think largely sometimes as parents, what we do is we unconsciously put onto our children what we think they should be, or how they should show up in the world. And I'm sure I did some of that. And so now it's, going back and saying, hey, this is what I learned about myself, even going back to, and I don't know what medicine to actually attribute it to. It's hard to say, but some of the healing that I did was actually retrospectively looking back on something that I didn't even know. Like, for example, I was really, really hard driving when it came to my fitness routine. I went from raw vegan to paleo, to, CrossFit. And I was got up every morning and had to do my 120 burpees before I did anything else. Just don't talk to me.
Strict on it.
Just this And I called them my non-negotiables, right? And in some ways, they are very powerful. And that kind of way of discipline is a beautiful thing. I haven't quite gotten back since psychedelics because I think like I needed such a break from them. But it really wasn't, this is again a beautiful thing. This was a little bit of a magic pill moment with psychedelics, actually, when I think about it. I was reflecting one day as these patterns were just kind of falling away without thought. It was more like, I don't feel like doing burpees. You know what? They're now negotiable. And I don't really feel like being raw vegan anymore. And like, I started to just change without
realizing it. Without saying I'm going to change and then changing, it just naturally unfolded.
And when I really look back, I look back now and I look back and I have to thank medicines for really healing what I would say was probably disordered way of being, a disordered way of eating, a disordered way of working out that really permeated then within my own kids, as far as like their workouts, their way of being. And it really wasn't until after that I could look back and say like, whoa, that was kind of problematic.
And it's all unconscious, as you said. It's not like you're doing this realizing that it's having these effects on your children as well. It's that, I mean, we're all doing the best that we can at the time with the information that we have been given. Totally. And until you start doing that deep work and really understanding it, you're going to continue to make the same unconscious decisions.
Totally. And even when you go to the worst of things, right? When you think of kind of the worst of things that are in society today, I think it is so important for victims to have absolute rage over what happens to them or happened to them. And I think like that is so cathartic and needed, actually. Mm-hmm. And then I think when you come to the other side of rage and grief, of, whatever happened to you, whatever, we all are going to experience something. Having the perspective that as horrible as what there is out in the world, that each person is walking the path. I know people don't like this. I think people really reject this idea, and I can see why. But I always think, like, if I was in your shoes, I would do exactly what you did.
Yeah.
As a way to have compassion for the fact that there are really horrible things that happen, and people don't have a place to actually talk about some of them, to get the help that they need. And so they do perpetuate. And I think, I think having compassion for the fact that everybody is doing their best, even at the worst, and even as a podcaster, a mom, whatever it is, that we're holding the safest and best containers that we have at the level of consciousness that we have.
Yeah.
And I think, in some ways, one of the reasons for me why I'm so focused on not only just individual work, but couples work and family work is because I really do believe that psychedelics are some of the most powerful tools we have on the planet to wake up, to maybe create better, healthier individuals than partnerships, than families, than world, that it's hopefully a tool that we can pull on to really access maybe a quickening of change within ourselves.
Yes, it can help you do it much quick. Like, this is all possible. All of this healing, all of this changing, this is all absolutely possible without psychedelics.
Totally.
But if there's something that's going to take what might happen in 10 years and now I can do it in 1 year, why wouldn't I want to try to use that thing in order to accomplish that?
It's interesting because I do think what you said is true. And again, in my own experience and what I've seen in supporting others in this space, I think that there are unique aspects of psychedelics that get to things that you might actually not get to without them. I really don't believe that my repressed memories were just going to show up one day.
Mm-hmm. I
I believe that kind of the strongest psychedelics on the planet were needed to get the ego offline, to be like, hey, want to look at some things? I don't think that was just going to happen on a run or,
Hey, go fetch.
Yeah. And even psychedelics were very interesting how they showed me. It was like little by little. It didn't just be like, here you go.
Oh yeah, no, it's not like, obviously like, okay, here are your problems. Here's what you need to do. It's gonna, it's gonna take you through these whole. It basically is gonna give you a riddle, and then you just solve the riddle, which is why it's funny when you I think see depicted in shows and things like that. All of these wise people, they're always speaking in riddles, and I find the exact same thing happening on psychedelic journeys. Is my own mind is speaking to me in riddles.
Yeah, and it's interesting to shut the mind off. I had a recent, maybe take out the word recent. I had an experience with toad medicine, and as soon as I came back, I started to put words to it, like, "Oh, it's all love," and I was like, no, just feel.
Yeah.
Just feel. And I think one of the deepest ways to return to self is through our bodies. But so many of us have become so disembodied. This beautiful compass that we have of our intuition, of what is deeply known within us. Even memories, like I said, the repressed memories, they are encoded within my body. And so I think one of the other things that psychedelics do so beautifully is return us back to the awareness that our body holds so much wisdom for us. Our body knows way before we do, before our mind does, whether something's right or wrong for us.
Mm-hmm.
But we've kind of learned to not attune to that. And I think you asked earlier, is working with somebody essential in this space? I know for me it has been. And my colleague that I work with didn't go the route that I did more group ceremonies, did more of that at first. And she has said, like, it definitely took longer.
Yeah. Because
when you're in a space with one or two space holders, and they're, psychedelic integration people, therapists, whatever, and then are highly trained and have done their own deep work and know what to look for, They've done it themselves, and they're really taking note of what's happening in your body, really giving you also feedback of what they're seeing, and you're tying all these threads together, and then you're helping with the integration. Even I think back now to the person that I did long-term integration with, really, and he was not someone who started in medicine, but he's a psychologist. He really helped me start to do some of the, like looking at systems, looking at these things.
Patterns.
Know that would have just come.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you again to Michaela for being such an awesome guest. If you guys would like to check Michaela out on Instagram, she is at the Psychedelic Mom. And then also check out the Psychedelic Mom Podcast on all podcast streaming platforms. If you like this episode, please be sure to follow us and give us a rating. And then also on Instagram, this is at tripsitting.blog. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next episode.